Hey everybody, welcome back to the Captain's Coffee. I'm David, and today we're sharing our beginner's guide to the Gene Cafe CBR-101. It's a great little roaster. It's really stood the test of time. It's simple, intuitive, and it's just fun to roast with. So maybe you've got one of these roasters, or you're considering buying one, or you've had one for a while and you just want to take it to the next level, because this guide isn't just for beginners. No sir or ma'am, we're going to completely cover this home roasting machine from stem to stern. We'll start with everything that comes in the box, including the controls, how it operates, then we'll go over our favorite tips and tricks for getting the most out of this machine. Finally, we'll share a sample roast from beginning to end so you can see exactly how it works and how we'd like to use it. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Oh hey, that's right, we're sponsored by us. thecaptainscoffee.com. In fact, we sell Gene Cafes in our online store, as well as other roasters like the Fresh Roast SR800 and SR540. If you're all set for roasters, we've got roaster parts, as well as green coffee for roasting, because, what's the point of having a home roaster if you don't roast coffee with it? Maybe you're into oddly shaped space heaters? If so, visit us at thecaptainscoffee.com and pick up your oddly shaped space heater today. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Gene Cafe CBR-101. Now, the biggest item in the box will of course be the main roasting unit. We're going to detail that one in the next section of the video. After that, we've got the roasting chamber, which you'll see right here. It's got an indication on the side for a fill level for dry processed beans. I personally recommend that you roast by weight instead of by volume. It's much more accurate. Beans can vary greatly in size, and roasting by weight will make your roasting a lot more consistent. Use a scale for that. Next, to put the chamber in, we're just going to open this lid right here. Just open this right up and slide it in along these rails so that the outlet lines up. Just like that. Now, in order to remove it, you just press this button on the top down and pull out. We're going to leave this in here for now and have a look at the other parts. Next up, we've got the chaff collector parts over here. This is the main body of the chaff collector. And then we've got the top. Now, the top goes on just by lining up these tabs you see. Just put them on the inside, and it'll snap right on just like that. And this part goes into the main roasting unit on the side here. Just slides right in. Now, when you're ready to empty your chaff after the roast is over and your roaster has completely cooled, once again, completely cooled, this can be really hot. We're just gonna slide it back out. And you'll see on this side, it says chaff, and we can just twist this cap in the direction of open. Twist it that way, and it'll pop right off. And we can dump our chaff out in the trash can, compost pile, whatever you like. Next, you just place it right back on the same way, and then twist back to close. And we're good to put it right back in the unit, just like this. It's always important to clean out your chaff collector after roasting. If there's a lot of chaff buildup, it can affect the heat inside the chamber, and most importantly, you can start a chaff fire, which is never a good thing to have. Finally, we've got the stand for the roasting chamber. As you notice, the bottom of the roasting chamber is not flat. It's built like that, but this stand will allow you to set it on the counter flat, which is great when you're ready to load in your green beans at the beginning of the roast. All right, now that we've got our roaster assembled and plugged in, let's talk about the controls and features. First, we'll need to turn on the roaster by hitting the blue button on the right. Now, once it comes on, you'll see the display here on the top. It'll show your air temperature, and it'll quickly cycle to the set temperature. And that's the temperature you control that you want the roaster to hit by rotating this red knob right here.
To begin the roast cycle, you hit that red button, and during the roast cycle, if you hit it again, it'll enter the cooling cycle. But the machine won't allow you to enter roast until you first set a time. That's on the bottom part of the display. And to do that, we want to turn this blue knob here. As soon as I touch it, it'll automatically default to the 15-minute time. Now, personally, I prefer to decide when I want my roast to start and how long I want it to go as I'm roasting, because what will happen is if this timer reaches 0 on its own, the roaster will automatically enter cooling mode. And I prefer to set it and pay attention to the roast as it goes. So I just turn this up pretty far, so that way I'm sure it won't automatically enter cool before I want it to. And this will go all the way up to 30 minutes if you need it to. Now let me point out a couple other features here that are less obvious. If you want the roaster to enter the emergency shutdown mode, which is useful for several reasons, which we'll talk about later, you simply want to hold down the red button until an E is displayed. And then what will automatically happen is the heating element will shut off and the roasting chamber will rotate to a position where it's ready to be pulled out. Next, let's talk about a safety feature. The Gene Cafe will sound an alarm when the roaster reaches around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. To deactivate that safety feature, simply hit the blue button and the alarm will stop. If you don't do this within a few seconds, the roaster will automatically enter cooling mode. The roaster will do this a second time, that is, sound the alarm, around 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Once again, simply hit the blue button one more time and it'll go off for good. Next, let's talk about exactly how the Gene Cafe works so we can better understand how to use it and how it's different from other roasters. The CBR-101 is an indirectly heated drum roaster. That means the beans are roasted using hot air, like lots of other home roasters, but the beans are agitated by rotating in a drum rather than a fluid bed like the SR800. However, it's also not like traditional drum roasters, which are directly heated by a firebox under the drum, so it's kind of a mix of air roasters and drum roasters. This results in a consistently even roast with a balanced but more subdued profile. So how does it work? The internal fan pulls air into the main unit where it's heated by the heating element. The hot air then enters the roasting chamber where it passes on that heat to the beans. The air picks up any chaff from the roasting beans, then exits through the outlet into the chaff collector. While the drum's rotating, you'll notice that there's a small gate on a hinge that goes back and forth due to gravity over the air and chaff outlet in the roasting chamber. This prevents chaff from building up on the outlet by sweeping it away as the chamber spins. Once in the chaff collector, the light chaff falls downward while the air exits upwards. All right, time for some general tips and tricks for roasting with the CBR-101. First, let's talk about preheating. One of the things Gene Cafes have in common with other drum roasters is that it seems to benefit greatly from a preheat cycle. Preheating your roaster before adding in your green beans has several benefits. Most importantly, it makes the roasting process more efficient. Think of it like baking. When you bake, you always preheat your oven to the temperature you'll be baking at before adding the ingredients. That's because there's a lot of materials in the oven or roasting chamber that need to be heated along with the ingredients. If we go ahead and get those materials in the chamber up to temp, there's less work for the heating element to do, resulting in a more efficient roast with better potential for development. My typical preheat protocol is to set the roaster up to maximum temperature, 482 degrees Fahrenheit, and then allow the air temperature to meet that, just like you would when preheating your oven. I then allow the roaster to run empty at this temperature for 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how patient I am at the moment. Once you're satisfied the roaster is preheated, put on some gloves or oven mitts. Hold down the red temperature button until it displays E for emergency stop, and wait for the roasting chamber to stop spinning. Now remove the chamber, place it on the stand, add your beans, and begin roasting as you normally would. Next up,
Let's talk some more about that heating element, since hot air is how the machine actually roasts coffee. Unlike most roasters, the heating element does not vary in heat output. It is simply either on or off, like a light switch. As long as the air temperature in the machine is lower than the temperature you set, the heating element will stay on and continually make the air in the roasting chamber hotter. Once the air temperature reaches your set temperature, the heating element turns off. It'll then automatically kick back on once the air temperature drops 10 or so Fahrenheit below your set temperature. What this means is that if you want to take more control over the heat in the roasting chamber, you'll need to be adjusting the heat further and further up in steps throughout the roast. In practice, I found this to be largely unnecessary when roasting a full batch of coffee. With an 8-ounce or 225 gram batch, the beans can take quite a bit of heat to build up the thermal momentum needed to reach the later stages of the roast. So I rarely make more than 1 or 2 temperature adjustments throughout the roast cycle. In fact, you can even simply set the temperature at max the entire roast, and usually you'll get good results, as long as you keep a close eye on it during the later stages. If you prefer to roast smaller batches, say 6 ounces or even 4 ounces, the heat will have a much bigger influence on the roast. In those cases, I'd recommend a more monitored and gradual increase in the set temperature throughout the entire roast. That's because less bean mass means more efficient airflow and less strain on the heating element. It makes sense that the heat in the chamber should increase more quickly with less stuff to heat up. While we're on the topic, I want to briefly discuss a couple different approaches to roasting with the Gene Cafe. You could kind of say there's an old school and a new school approach. Both are perfectly fine, and I want to encourage you to try both and see which one gives you the results you prefer. The point of roasting your own coffee isn't always to roast perfect coffee, but to roast coffee that's perfect for you. So, to each their own. The old school method is a slow and steady approach. Typical batches roasted to full medium take around 15 minutes, with darker roast approaching 18 minutes or more. The beans are given longer to absorb heat more gradually, and when done carefully, this can result in a much more even roast with more rounded out and gentle flavors. However, there's the risk that the roast goes too slow, and you can end up baking the beans rather than roasting them, especially with larger batches. Baked coffee beans tend to have a flat, empty taste and a thinner body, so there's a careful line to walk here. The temperature is usually set lower in this approach in order to slow the roast down. If you'd like to see a demo roast using the old school method, check out the link in the description below once you finish this video. Former Captain Ben does a fantastic job showcasing how to achieve a slower roast successfully. In this video, our sample roast will be more of a new school approach. This method prefers faster roast, using higher temperatures. Faster roasts usually preserve more origin flavor, especially when we refer to attributes like acidity and brightness. In this case, acidity doesn't mean pH level, like with vinegar. Instead, we mean effervescence and sparkling qualities, more like citrus zest. This adds character to the cup, but some folks simply prefer a flatter cup, so of course, to each their own. Faster roasts do run a risk as well. They have a higher likelihood of uneven roasting and issues like scorching, tipping, or being underdeveloped. Underdeveloped roasts are astringent and sour, so once again, there's a line we have to carefully walk. Now we come to the final part of the roast, the cooling cycle. The Gene Cafe's fan operates at a set speed, meaning the cooling cycle is pretty long and a bit slow for some folks. There are a few ways to manually cool the beans if that's your preference. If you're planning on manually cooling, stop the cycle by hitting the cool button a second time. Remove the chamber with gloves or oven mitts, and then place the freshly roasted beans in a metal strainer in front of a strong fan, or even invest in a coffee bean cooler, which will cool the beans very quickly without you having to do anything. If you're going to manually cool the beans, I recommend that once you're done, you place the chamber back into the roaster and allow the cooling cycle to run normally, with the chamber empty. This brings the chamber back to room temperature gradually and keeps down on wear and tear. If you're roasting back to back, simply begin another cycle to keep the roaster preheated while you manually cool the roast you just finished. Now, if you prefer to allow the Gene Cafe to run the cooling cycle as intended, be aware that since it's a bit slower, there will be some roast momentum, meaning the beans will continue to coast along on their own for a few seconds. You'll need to account for this when deciding when to begin the cooling cycle. My rule of thumb is to begin the cooling cycle about 15 seconds before the beans are at my preferred final roast level. Finally, let's go over some general tips when roasting with any home roaster. Make sure you're using a power outlet that's on a dedicated 20 amp or higher circuit, and avoid using low quality extension cords or extension cords at all whenever possible. Check the ambient temperature to ensure it's above about 60 degrees if you're going to roast outside. If it's cold out, you'll have better results roasting inside with predictable ambient temperatures. When roasting inside, place your machine under your oven's exhaust fan or roast near open windows. So, now that you know everything you need to know to start roasting with the Gene Cafe, it's time to share a sample roast. Now keep in mind, following this roast exactly isn't guaranteed to be a perfect roast for you and your coffee, since every coffee is a little different and unique in its own way. I really hope this is a great starting point in your home coffee roasting journey that you can use as a baseline. For best results, always keep a roast log, noting your adjustments during the roast, and keep notes of which roast tastes the best, because at the end of the day, all that matters is that you like your coffee. Today we're roasting a full 225 gram or 8 ounce batch of organic Colombian coffee from the El Ruby estate. Now at this point we've already allowed the roaster to preheat to max temperature and cycle there for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to hold down the red button to emergency stop the roast, remove the chamber, and set it into the stand. Then I'll load the beans into the chamber and place the chamber back into the roaster. Next, you want to hit the red button once more to leave emergency stop mode and turn it to set your target temperature. Lastly, turn the blue knob in order to activate the timer and press the red button again to begin the roast cycle. Since this is a full batch, I don't feel the need to bump up the temperature slowly throughout the roast, so I'm going to set the temperature up pretty high at about 420 degrees Fahrenheit for just the first couple minutes during the drying phase of the roast. This keeps the beans from scorching as they acclimate to the heat of the roasting chamber. Note that I use a separate timer as I prefer to log the time elapsed rather than a countdown, which is what the machine displays. Also, you'll notice that the lengthy preheat kept the air temperature in the machine from dropping below 340 degrees Fahrenheit. I found if I start at room temperature, the beans take way too long to roast a full batch and can easily stall out or bake the roast. If you prefer not to preheat, I'd advise roasting smaller batches. Now let's fast forward a bit and let the machine do some work. Once the air temperature in the roaster reaches about 400 degrees, the roaster's alarm sounds. All you need to do to stop the alarm is to hit the blue button. As I've noted before, be sure to turn the alarm off or the roaster will enter cooling mode. Notice I've decided to leave the lid open on the roaster just so you can more easily watch the beans as they change throughout the roast. Otherwise, I'd recommend leaving it closed so you don't accidentally bump into the very hot chamber and burn yourself. We're 3 minutes into the roast and I've allowed the beans to coast near 420 degrees for the last minute. They've had plenty of time now to acclimate to the heat in the chamber and we're ready to move into the next phase of the roast, which is the Maillard or caramelization phase. I'm going to increase the set temperature all the way to max, 482 degrees. This allows the heat to ramp up leading into the final stage of the roast. Heat ramping is important because you don't want to slow down the roast at this point or you risk stalling it and baking the beans. At around 4 minutes, you can see our beans are a nice uniform pale yellow color. This is what's called the yellow point and indicates we've left the drying phase and our roast is entering the Maillard phase. I always note this point in my roast log. Also, you'll notice the exhaust from the roaster has taken on a pleasant wet hay or grassy smell. For reference, if we were able to measure the temperature of the actual beans and not just the air in the chamber, the beans would be at about 320 degrees Fahrenheit when they hit the yellow point.
Our final alarm sounds just shy of 450 degrees air temperature. This is a great reminder to pay attention to the rest of the roast as the coming stages are critical. Our beans are browning or caramelizing nicely, so I know it won't be too long until we reach the final stage of the roast, which is the development stage, beginning when you hear first crack. Note that first crack occurs when the beans themselves reach a temperature of about 380 degrees. At this point, the exhaust in the machine has begun to smell less like wet hay and more like actual coffee. Finally, at 8 minutes and 15 seconds, we hear first crack. For beginners, cracks can sometimes be difficult to distinguish from the noise in the machine, so I'm going to turn up the roaster audio and let you listen for a while to hear what a rolling first crack sounds like. Now comes decision time. When is the roast ready? Well, I like to roast this coffee to a full medium or full city. This is when first crack is ended or trailed off, but second crack, which indicates darker roasts, hasn't begun. For most coffees, this happens about 1.5 to 2.5 minutes after first crack begins. At 10.5 minutes, first crack is trailed off and I haven't heard any second cracks yet, so it's time to cool the roast. For this video, I decided to allow the beans to cool automatically using the Gene Cafe's cool cycle. Remember that I mentioned the cool cycle in the machine is a bit slow, so I want to begin at about 15 seconds early. Since I haven't heard any second cracks yet, we should be just fine. Now I'm going to cut to the end of the cooling cycle because it lasts about 7 minutes and there's nothing we need to do while the coffee cools down. As a final note, when you remove your beans following the cool cycle, the chamber can still be pretty hot, so I recommend once again wearing gloves or oven mitts. Here we have our final product, a nice and even full medium roast. With a full medium roast, we shouldn't see any oily spots on the beans. Don't worry, those shiny spots you see are just from the bright lights, not oil. So there you have it, our complete beginner's guide to the Gene Cafe CBR-101. I really hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you learned something new. If you did, leave us a like right down below and subscribe for more coffee roasting and brewing guides. If you have more questions about coffee roasting or suggestions of your own, leave us a comment down below. We really do read all of our comments and we try to respond to them quickly. We've got lots more guides on home roasting and home coffee brewing, so check those out and don't forget to visit us at thecaptainscoffee.com. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching and happy roasting.